Delighted to be here to talk to you today. Hopefully you can see the slides that I'm going to be referencing. Today's talk is titled Mental Health and Mental Wellness, Insights and Considerations for the Legal Profession. And it's exactly that for Mental Health Awareness Month. It's designed to raise awareness, to share insights and considerations. Importantly, there are no official disclosures. I was very well and kindly introduced. The work that I do, as mentioned, is community mental health work. So I am a psychologist who works mostly where we find others. I work in people's homes, I work in homeless shelters, community health centers, emergency departments, and other places. When I work there in Ontario and also in the North, there's an important note that comes about, and my adolescent clients always say to me, you always have to prove your street credibility. So hopefully some of my attachments are sufficient street credibility to talk to you today. I'd like to start today by talking a little bit about your brain and cognitive functioning. Then to talk a little bit about what are the issues that support optimal brain functioning, and the effect of that on your interactions with others, on your own mental health, on raising awareness and appreciation for the mental health of others, and then importantly on stress and stress management and evidence-based options for mental health care. The talk is also designed to allow time for questions and discussions as well at the end, so I hope we'll be able to do that. So if we're talking about mental health and mental health awareness, why start with the brain? Well, simply put, you're a profession that are known for your cognitive abilities. You're a profession that us, the general public, rely on consistent and high-quality cognitive abilities. So it's fairly important to know a little bit about the brain and how it relates to mental health and mental health awareness. In order to do that, I'm going to play an ever so short video from National Geographic.
The brain is the most complex organ in the human body. As part of the nervous system, the brain coordinates all of the body's functions. In adult humans, the brain is a 3-pound gelatinous mass of fat and protein. It's comprised of 4 main regions: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon, and each one controls specific tasks. The largest section is the cerebrum, and it makes up over 3/4 of the brain's volume. It consists of neurons and nerve fibers that transmit information from the neurons throughout the brain and body. The cerebrum controls higher functions such as learning, reasoning, and speech, plus senses like sight and hearing. Under the cerebrum is the second largest part of the brain, the cerebellum. Much like the cerebrum, the cerebellum has nerve cells and nerve fibers. It carries signals to other parts of the brain and the spinal cord. The cerebellum is responsible for coordinating muscle movements, particularly those that help maintain the body's balance and posture. The third region, the brainstem, lies in front of the cerebellum and anchors the brain to the spinal cord. The brainstem is a collection of structures that include the pons, a mass of nerve fibers that carry sensory information, the midbrain, a region of fibers and structures that help control movement, along with auditory and visual processing, and the medulla oblongata, which creates motor and sensory pathways between the midbrain, the pons, and the spinal cord. Altogether, the parts of the brainstem control vital bodily functions such as cardiac activity, respiration, digestion, and sleep. The fourth region is located above the brainstem and makes up the core of the brain, the diencephalon. About the size of an apricot, the diencephalon is a grouping of several structures. The thalamus, which processes and transmits information from all senses except smell, and the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which work together to produce and regulate neurochemicals. These structures help govern sensations, weight regulation, energy, and instinctual behaviors, such as eating, drinking, and having sex. The brain's 4 main components, the diencephalon, brainstem, cerebellum, and cerebrum, work in sync to ensure bodily functions are fully operational. The brain has even evolved mechanisms to protect itself. One such mechanism is the blood-brain barrier, a semi-permeable cellular wall that only allows specific chemicals to enter from the body's bloodstream into the brain. Despite this protection, tumors and other complications can lead to life-threatening problems and diseases in the brain, such as dementia. Thankfully, scientists have found ways to improve brain health. Staying physically active and eating a balanced diet may preserve cognitive function and even reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's. So while the brain only makes up a small percentage of the body, it plays a crucial role in the body's functions and overall well-being.
So that was a fairly quiet video of the 4 regions of the brain. And in case you're wondering, all 4 get activated when you are the lunchtime speaker and realize that the speakers are inadequate to play the video you're hoping to show. So what I'd like to do is sort of repeat a couple of the main things. Why talk about brain structure in Mental Health Awareness Month? Well, simply put, it's really important as we talk about how to optimize brain functioning to know a little bit about those different structures. It may seem fairly removed from your day-to-day tasks or the things that contribute to your mental health, but I hope by the end of my remarks you'll appreciate that there are biological, cognitive, and emotional factors that are all going to contribute to your mental health and your mental wellness. But in actual fact, what people usually ask me, and the most important question or the thing to put out right up front is, are lawyers' brains actually different? I get asked this a lot. And it's probably in my best interest to say, yes, you have bigger brains, better brains, and all the rest of it. In fact, when I was a young child and I would ask my grandfather very complicated questions that had multi-part answers, he would reference a game show that you may have heard of called the $64,000 question. While my economist spouse has informed me that that is now the $566,000 question. Are lawyers' brains really different? And the actual fact of the matter is, to an extent, but what in fact could be different and could be contributing to your mental health and wellness? Well, believe it or not, intelligence, the very thing that I rely on your profession for, is the smallest part of the difference. Frontal lobe and executive functioning, which I'm going to speak about in just a minute, that front part of the brain that the video was whispering about, is something that is quite unique and you do have some control over. But most importantly, we're going to look at emotional intelligence, stress, and mental health. So the frontal lobe of the brain, why I showed you that video about the 4 regions was to talk about this first part of your brain that affects something called executive functioning. Now, there's great debate among psychologists about at what age your executive functioning fully develops. And initially, it was thought to be in your 30s, possibly your 20s. Some people would argue in adolescence. I am the parent of adolescents, so I would like to unequivocally state it has not yet developed in adolescence. There are a number of different executive functions, and as we go through these, this is actually lifted from a popular magazine just to sort of provide you with a graphic. But think about these different tasks relative to the work that you do. Then we're going to make the connection to how does this relate to your mental wellness. Well, the first is emotional control. Simply put, your intelligence and the expression of it is greatly regulated by the extent to which you can demonstrate emotional control. And you might be able to think of colleagues or others and understand why. Your ability to initiate work, the tasks that are required in getting work started. And simply put, those people with a better initiation ability are usually seen to be more successful and have higher rates of mental wellness. Working memory. There are different types of memory. Your working memory is what I'm telling you right now. Your short-term memory is something that happened to you within the last few weeks or months, and your long-term memory is longer ago than that. What's interesting is that your long-term memory is there because something is important or emotional or relevant to you. You probably don't know, unless it's the same thing every day, what you had for breakfast on Tuesday, October the 11th of 1987. Or you shouldn't know that because that would be taking up a lot of space. But your long-term memories are things that are attached to things that are important. Your working memory is quite different. It's information you need to hold in the short term, and you decide whether or not it's going to get filed back. So my hope will be that a couple of my remarks today will actually make it back in your filing system, but that will be up to you. Mental health and stress really affect our ability to do that filing process. Organizing. You can imagine as one experiences decreased mental wellness or increased stress, the effect on things like being able to organize oneself. Planning tasks. And then the final ones are inhibitory control. That notion of, as I say at home, your inside voice versus your outside voice, and being really clear on which one you're using, particularly with your math teacher. The notion of monitoring, how your performance matches the expectations of others or external structures that you're in. The ability to keep mindful of that is actually a really important issue both in brain functioning, but also in mental health. And then finally, it's the notion of it all coming together, the executive functions that all come together for optimal cognitive ability. So biologically, what is it that our brain needs to support optimal executive functioning? Well, think about those tasks I just mentioned relative to your week, month, or year at work. You can probably quickly imagine how some of those come into play more quickly than others. But what is it that you do to optimize some of those things? There's a debate about things like Sudoku, flashcards, all of these sorts of things. None of those things are bad ideas, but this is actually the evidence-informed list of what your brain needs to optimize its functioning. Not surprisingly, health and nutrition are the top of that list. That won't surprise anyone, it's an important issue, but I encourage you, when you think about your health and nutrition, put a little bit of a different twist on it relative to mental wellness. It's not just what you eat, it's when and where you eat. So what do I mean by that? You have the good fortune today of eating in this beautiful location with colleagues, but every day, where are you eating? Is your lunch in front of a screen? Is your lunch with others? Is your lunch taking a break? Where and when you eat can sometimes be as important as what you eat, including the times that you eat. The notion of a healthy, active lifestyle, and that's different for everyone, but being really mindful of that. It's interesting to watch, in terms of social psychology and human behavior, the advent of the Fitbit. I have one on my wrist right now. The Fitbit reminds me when I'm sitting too long to get up and move. If only we had a Fitbit for our emotions to remind us to keep some of those executive functions and other things in check. Sleep. I don't need to tell you that your sleep is connected to your mental wellness, but in a moment I'm going to give you a couple of considerations to optimize your sleep. Mindfulness or mental resilience. Simply put, being in the moment rather than being back in the past or worried too far ahead about the future. It always sounds easier than it is, particularly when we're busy, but it is one of the key factors in promoting our mental wellness. Mental health itself. We're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the things to be aware of and being really mindful of your mental health and the changes in your and others' mental health and what to do about that. We expect changes in our physical health over time, and yet we often seem surprised when we have changes in our mental health. I hope that I can impress on you the need to be monitoring both very closely. And then finally, the awareness and willingness to make change. We all know what's important to do, particularly after we have talks about it, but it's the awareness of those patterns in our own life or in the life of people we care about and our willingness to make change. So let's talk about a good night's sleep. You can see in some of the circles around here that there are a lot of benefits to a good night's sleep, and none of those benefits will surprise you. All of the executive functions I mentioned are affected by a good night's sleep, your energy level, and your mental health, your overall mood state. But what's so interesting about a good night's sleep is how hard a concept that is to define for so many people. In fact, it's called sleep hygiene for a reason. We have physical hygiene. We have certain things we need to do to take care of our physical bodies. When I was flying here this morning, I was sitting beside a woman who is a professor in terms of dental hygiene, and she was telling me all kinds of things that put me to shame about how one is supposed to take care of their teeth. But sleep hygiene is a very specific and very important thing. And it's not just the number of hours of sleep that you have. Sleep hygiene involves some key issues relative to behavior that are completely within your control. One of the ones that I'll say, and I'll warn you right off the top, it makes me incredibly unpopular, is that sleep hygiene is going to bed and waking up at the same time 7 days a week. Sleep hygiene is also how do we treat sleeplessness. Another unpopular thing, if you are someone who's ever watched Netflix, particularly your favorite show, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen as one episode ends, you've got 10 critical seconds to make a decision about if you're going to engage in another episode or close the iPad. Now, I'm not suggesting every psychologist who knows better always resists the temptation. But when we have sleeplessness, we need to look at the notion of what are the behaviors that preceded trying to go to sleep. When an airplane lands, it's not up in the air and down on the ground. There's a whole landing gear series that happens. The same thing happens with your sleep. So it is a very wise idea to be off backlit screens if you're experiencing sleeplessness for about an hour. It's a very wise idea if you're experiencing sleeplessness not to lie in bed and toss and turn. In fact, sleep experts say after 15 minutes, if you're not asleep, you need to get up and do something else and only return to bed when you're tired. The issue is, what do? It has nothing to do with your iPad. What you need to do is something that you find boring, unstimulating, or something that's going to deactivate your mind a little bit. I am very fortunate because in our home library, we have a whole bookshelf of my spouse's economist textbooks, and they work like a charm every time. And then finally, the notion of pre and post sleep routines. So what does that mean? How we get ready for bed, but also how we get up in the morning. Sleeplessness is contributed to by the number of times we also press the snooze button in the morning. So those are the biological issues related to our brain health that underpin our mental wellness. What about our interactions with others? How does my brain affect my relationships? Well, executive functioning, some of those things we spoke about, inhibitory control, emotional control, organizing, you can imagine how those have an effect on some of your key relationships. Emotion functioning and intelligence, relationship behavior, and mental health are all of the important parts of the emotional part of the brain. So I was trying to look for a short clip, and I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit louder, to sort of explain to you how does emotion functioning work in 1 minute or less. And I looked through scientific clips, I looked through National Geographic, and then I realized that old adage in life is if you want something well explained, go to Disney. So here's a small clip from the movie Inside Out.
Very nice. Okay, looks like you got this. Very good. Oh, that's sharp turn! Ah, look out!
That's Fear. He's really good at keeping Riley safe.
Easy, huh? Hi, back! Oh, we're good. We're good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we're back.
Here we go. All right, open.
This looks new.
Think it's safe?
What is it?
Okay, caution. There is a dangerous smell, people. Hold on, what is that?
This is disgust. She basically keeps Riley from being poisoned, physically and socially.
That is not brightly colored or shaped like a dinosaur. Hold on, guys. It's broccoli! Well, I just saved our lives. Yeah, you're welcome.
Riley, if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going to get any dessert.
Wait, did he just say we couldn't have dessert?
That's anger. He cares very deeply about things being fair.
So that's how you want to play it, old man? No dessert? Oh, sure. We'll eat our dinner right after you eat this.
Riley, here comes an airplane.
Oh, airplane. We got an airplane, everybody.
And you've met Sadness. Well, she... I'm not actually sure what she does. And I've checked, there's no place for her to go, so she's good. We're good. It's all great.
The intentionality there is that there are 4 different characters that promote the simultaneous processing of emotions. They're represented there as different characters, but the idea being that sometimes we are surprised when we can so quickly change between a different range of emotions. And mental wellness is about that notion of emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. So, you've all heard of IQ, and I hope by this point most of you have heard of emotional intelligence as well. Simply put, IQ, or intellectual ability, is a quotient measured by psychologists that covers a range of things like verbal comprehension, memory, working memory, procedures, processing speed. And executive functioning is all within that measurement. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, is 5 categories, and Katie asked me rightfully to touch on those today relative to mental wellness and support. What's really interesting, though, is looking at people who have variability in their IQ level and their EQ level, both in terms of their work performance, but also in terms of their mental wellness. What percentage of what people rate as overall success do you think is attributed to IQ, or intelligence? Anybody think it's over 50? Anybody think it's over 25? It's about 15%, according to the most recent study. So it matters. We want you to be smart. By the same token, we want you to also have a really high level of emotion intelligence. So what do we mean by that? Emotional intelligence has 5 key components. And they look an awful lot like the executive functioning, or the interplay between that I was mentioning. The first is self-awareness. Emotional awareness and self-confidence have a very big role in our mental wellness. Self-regulation, which again sounds an awful lot like executive functioning. Our ability to exhibit self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, adaptability, and innovation are all important parts in promoting our mental health and mental wellness. Our motivation, our drive for achievement, commitment, initiative, and optimism are all particularly important in our mental wellness. The last 2 components of emotional intelligence are empathy, service orientation, developing others, leveraging and celebrating diversity, political awareness, and understanding other people. And our social skills, you can see there in terms of the range of influence, communication, leadership. So EQ interventions are particularly important in supporting mental wellness. And many people who receive mental health treatment is both looking at symptoms, but also looking at emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence interventions are often seen as promoting emotion regulation. So what does emotion regulation mean? It's the ability to respond to situations, to recognize that you've got a range of emotions, and to display those both sensitively and appropriately, both through your feelings and your behavior. An awful lot like those biological elements of brain health that I was just speaking about. But emotion regulation, importantly, is not a few things. It's not being consistently passive or dominant. It's not having consistent emotions at all time. Fluctuation and variability is really important in your emotions to promote mental wellness. It's not being able to suppress your emotions or to talk other people into feeling the way that you do. Now, we're going to give video clips one last chance, because if there's one that's important, it's going to be this one. It's only a few seconds long, but this is the notion here of 2 characters who, one really understands emotional intelligence, he believes quite well. So he's going to coach a colleague into this. And this is important because we're about to talk about how do you support others and promote their emotional intelligence while monitoring your own. So I know Drew can make this one happen.
They only gave us computer speakers. So
okay.
Let's see what we can do. This one.
Bert!
Oh, Bert! Hey, Bert, listen! Listen, Bert, you gotta come quick out into the kitchen, Bert, because something terrible's happened out in the kitchen. You gotta come out into the kitchen, Bert,
slow
real
down,
quick,
Ernie.
Bert.
Ernie, no, wait. See, I can't understand a word you're saying. You're talking too fast. Just slow down.
Yes, Bert, but you gotta come real quick out into the kitchen here, Bert, because...
No, Ernie, no good, Ernie.
Here,
I still can't understand you. Just talk slow, real slow now, okay?
Okay.
Okay, now. Yeah.
But what I wanted to tell you is that the bread that you put in the toaster is burning, Bert.
My bread is burning? Yeah. Oh, Ernie, why didn't you tell me sooner? Oh, my bread. Oh, look at all that bread is all ruined. Ernie, my bread is ruined.
Wait a second,
on toast and look what
Bert,
what?
Bert, stop.
What?
You gotta talk slower. I can't understand you, Bert.
How quickly, when we're trying to promote mental wellness in others, can we give those quick lectures? And then all of a sudden, stress becomes us, and the tables turn. So emotion regulation skills are that notion of feeling identification, the ability to start and pursue goals, and you can see some of the other things on the list. All of them are very key to professional success. But what's really important is how we monitor changes in our ability to regulate emotions. Equally important is how we coach other people to regulate emotions and recognize changes in them. So for the legal profession, what are some of the key issues? CBA had a wellness report that's almost 7 years old now, but I think it makes two very key points that I wanted to share with you about the perception of health and wellness issues facing lawyers. The first one was when 1,100 lawyers were sampled and asked questions about what is the most significant issue in health and wellness facing lawyers today. You can see that stress and burnout was acknowledged by almost 94% of respondents. That is higher than any other professional group that I or my colleagues have ever seen. The next was this notion of exposure to health or wellness, who had received services, who knew someone in the profession who had received services. And with those high rates of stress and burnout, it wasn't quite 50% of those same people who had ever received, or 50% who knew, or 30% who had received services. So that's a lot of people experiencing mental health challenges without receiving care. So we ask ourselves, why the dichotomy? Supply and demand curves aren't always in our favor in healthcare, but there is more available and there is more access than is sometimes being used in certain professions. So this is an interesting quote. Most people would rather suffer in silence and not get treatment because of the stigma that surrounds it. This is particularly poignant for lawyers because they are valued for what they bring from the neck up. Okay? It's the very asset being used that's being threatened. There was another interesting study that looked recently at family physicians and how the general public would feel going to a family physician who had experienced depression. And many people in the general public said that they would rather go to a less qualified physician than one who had experienced depression. And that's a very concerning finding in 2019. What we need to do is understand that while you may not choose to share all of your mental health issues with people, treatment makes a difference, it matters, we have to support ourselves and others to receive it. So why the stigma? It's really interesting to watch how people approach someone when they have a physical health issue, right? A broken bone. A broken bone usually, if I came in with a cast and a cadre of colorful markers, you might all be willing to sign my broken wrist. But to announce in the middle of something, oh, I have depression, or I suffer from anxiety, or I feel situational anxiety when my videos don't work, or anything else, people will smile knowingly at you and usually step back a little bit. The Mental Health Commission did an interesting study that looked at how do we as a society feel about the notion of mental health. And one of the things they did was they studied gift shops in hospitals. You may have gone to hospital to visit someone with a physical illness or someone who's had a baby. And if you forget to pick something up at the last minute, there's always a gift shop there where you can buy something, except in a psychiatric hospital. We don't have gift shops because our folks don't get visitors. I think that's an awful shame. So why do we place the same attribution, not place it on mental health symptoms as physical health symptoms? When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, nobody asked her to pull up her socks. Nobody asked her what she had done wrong, and nobody stepped away from her. Casseroles flowed, and kindness flowed too. So we wouldn't judge somebody for getting physical health treatment. We have to be really mindful, even if we don't speak them, of sometimes the unspoken assumptions about receiving and accessing mental health care. Raising awareness is an important issue, and in fact, in your practice management guidelines, there is a very good chapter around personal management that talks about some recognition of early signs and symptoms. It's particularly well done. Some of the ones that we see, though, however, in our clinic that are not mentioned there or mentioned to the same extent are some of the things that may in fact be pervasive and just get habituated to. And I'd actually like you to reconsider it, to change this notion of habituation to new recognition of these things. People who experience chronic stress and burnout, the idea that it will eventually get better and people lose enthusiasm or interest in the work. Changes in coping strategies. Coping is designed to be individual, but if the things that you used to do are no longer working, it's important to start to examine why and question if perhaps you're experiencing stress, burnout, or depression. Changes in our reactions towards other people. An increase in social isolation. There is no research to suggest that introverts are more likely to have mental health problems, but if we used to do our coping with others and we tend to isolate ourselves, that's a very important thing to watch in ourselves, but also watch in our colleagues. And then this notion of compassion fatigue. What does that mean relative to stress? Because stress is an inevitable part of your and most professions. So how do we balance what we're watching with stress? Well, if any of you ever took Psychology 100, you may have learned about this stress curve. This is the curve that suggests that absolutely no stress in our life really doesn't motivate us to do terribly much. It's the thing I try to say to adolescents all the time. In the middle of the curve is that optimum amount. I have the resources I need, I have challenging work, I have a realistic deadline. That's kind of optimal performance. But then there's the other downward slide or high stress. And what's really important is that the industrial psychology research suggests that most people believe they are in the middle of the curve when actually, when they're measured in terms of stress hormones, stress reactions, and others, are on the far side of it. We might be losing our ability to recognize where we are on the stress curve. Let's think about it relative to working conditions. There is an unfortunate analogy, if you like frogs, but it works here relative to the picture, about a frog in boiling water. A pot of boiling water resembles very stressful working conditions in a firm, in an organization, or anywhere else. And new frogs are unlikely to want to be dropped into that pot of boiling water. In fact, when you have a pot of boiling water, if you take a frog and pop it in, it's going to pop itself right back out. Now, my boss calls those millennials. I don't know if that's fair. But the notion of people aren't going to jump right into boiling water. However, most people start in a pot of water when it's about lukewarm, and stress, expectations, mental health challenges raises the temperature, and yet they sit in that hot pot of water, and they don't jump out. We as humans, and amphibians as frogs, habituate very quickly to changes in circumstances, and we need to be mindful of what are we accepting as our boiling pot of water. Is it that there are workplace cultural norms that are shaping our tolerance for how hot the water is that we're sitting in? What is our sense of work-life balance? Exposure to case or client content. This is one place where your profession and mine share something in common. We can't go home and have discussions about confidential issues, so what do we do with that information? Understanding our responsibilities are also key. A lot of people who experience compassion fatigue or burnout talk about this notion of having the world on their back, the sense that they're having to take on so much and are not able to share it with others anymore. Stress and its secondary effects are things to be really mindful of in the language of others and the things that we tell ourselves about our work. So I always get asked, what is the most effective method for stress management? There's got to be one. What's the one? What does the science say? What's the most effective thing I can do? Do we all run and sign up for a yoga class? Do we all go sign up for the next marathon? Are we all going to learn to cook some certain type of food? Here is the most effective method for stress management. Look in the mirror and really ask yourself, when I have been most satisfied, most fulfilled, enjoyed my free time the most, what was I doing? Who was I with? And can I get that back? Individual differences and pleasurable activities often get ignored when we're in collective professional cultures. But it's really important to be individualistic in how we manage our stress. Those things that we do can be wholly different than others as long as we're checking in that they're still effective. Consider the time you spend with others and with yourself. And consider how we experience stress. Everyone is different on that stress curve. Be mindful of where you are. Be certain you're in the right place for you. And then there's the notion of supporting other people. If we start to notice movement on the stress curve in others, some of their coping strategies not being used as often, what are the things that we should do? Most people, unfortunately, don't know what to say, so they say nothing. And that's usually the wrong thing. Lean into people, not away from them. Even if all you can say is, I don't know what to say. I notice that you used to do a lot of this. I don't hear you do that anymore. I notice you're seeming like you're describing being tired all the time. It is fair to share observations if they come from a caring place. But remember, you may get a range of reactions in response. Not everybody loves to be told that they look dead tired. So think a little bit about that. Offering observations in a non-judgmental stance are important. Most people who receive support for depression or burnout talk about how isolated they felt just before they came for services. So I'm not suggesting you have to make up symptoms or a story or talk about your great aunt or this or that, but offer some familiarity to people so they feel less alone. Because chances are very strong you've been in a place of feeling stressed. Be the person who reduces that sense of isolation and encourage care and request for accommodation when possible. So in closing, what are some of the options if we recognize that we want to do other things to optimize our mental health? Well, although there are those factors for brain health, there are those factors for our physical and cognitive health, for our emotional reactivity and regulation. And quite honestly, there's the serenity prayer. It's being able to accept that you won't be able to change everything that may present as stressful, but that you can usually change more than you initially thought, for yourself and for others. There are lifestyle considerations to be made relative to brain health. There are important treatment options, and there are many, many websites that will well explain mental health treatment, including some self-help supports. CMHA Ontario has a tremendous website that can explain that process, and it's really quite user-friendly for everyone. Self-strategies, medication, and change. But the number one thing is self-care and being able to give yourself some recognition that you and your mental wellness need as much care as your physical health, your dental hygiene, and anything else. Back to the people who took Psych 100. You probably thought you would never see this again, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what happens when we are in professional groups or when we're really focused on our professional success is that rightfully we focus on the top of that pyramid, actualizing ourselves, really achieving, reaching our professional goals. This is very important and absolutely can contribute to your mental wellness. But your mental wellness is a pyramid. That is the top, and you must take care of the bottom realms as well. So Maslow was really onto something when he talked about taking care of your basic needs, your psychological needs, and then self-actualizing. Thank you very much for your time.